All right. Okay, welcome to our systematic reviews and introduction workshop. This is part of our WorkSmart library workshops through the FIU libraries. We do offer these every semester. I think this might be the last one, but all of the recordings live on the FIU Libraries Instruction YouTube channel. Some of them also live on the FIU Medical Library YouTube channel as well. My name is Daisy De La Rosa. I'm an Information and Instruction Services Librarian with the FIU Medical Library, and I'll have my colleagues introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Francis Marsili. I am a learning and reference librarian here at FIU.
Hi, my name is Joanna Fernandez, and I am the Health Sciences Librarian here at the FIU Libraries.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Um, okay, so we kind of talked about this a little bit already before we started the recording, so we'll kind of skip the Zoom poll for now. So this is what we're going to be covering in the time we have together. We're going to define what a systematic review is and what their characteristics are, what you should consider before doing this type of project and why. Be familiar with some standards and guidelines. There are standards out there that guide researchers on how to conduct these types of systematic reviews or evidence syntheses, and then how to report, what you did and your findings. We'll talk about or give you kind of a 30,000-foot view of the entire process. Recognize the importance of the research question and how it guides all of your decisions when you're doing these types of projects. Because we're librarians, we're going to dive a little deeper into the type of searching that's required for systematic reviews. And then we're going to point you to some resources that will help you with each step of the process. So what is a systematic review? So here on this slide, you see that there is a puzzle of this elephant. So systematic reviews a lot of the times are compared to puzzles where each puzzle piece is an individual study. And then the process of putting that puzzle together is a systematic review process. And at the end, you can kind of, a puzzle piece by itself, you kind of, maybe don't know what the whole picture looks like. But when all the pieces are together, you're able to see the bigger picture of what the evidence is saying about something. So here's a definition from Cochrane. The Cochrane collaboration are kind of the gold standard of systematic reviews. They provide guidance to researchers and they conduct them themselves. So their definition is a systematic review attempts to identify, so locate, appraise, check for quality and synthesize, bring all together the empirical evidence that meets pre-specified eligibility criteria to answer a specific research question. The researchers that conduct systematic reviews use explicit systematic methods that are selected with a view at minimizing bias to produce more reliable findings to inform decision making. So here on the right, we have a little GIF where the magnet is kind of pulling all the relevant studies that meet that criteria, being put into that funnel, letting us know, what the evidence looks like when it's put all together. So that little plot that it creates, it kind of, if you're able to do a meta-analysis, that will be something that you'll see. We also wanted to include a definition from the Campbell collaboration, which gives guidance for systematic reviews in the social sciences, but the definitions are very similar. Systematic review uses transparent procedures, right, to find, evaluate for quality, and synthesize the results of relevant research. The procedures are explicitly defined in advance, right, so pre-specified, to ensure the exercise is transparent. So again, trying to minimize that bias and that someone could replicate your methods and your results. So it has to be a reproducible process. The studies that you include in the review are screened for quality so that the findings of a large number of studies can be combined. So typical characteristics of systematic reviews, there are clear objectives with predefined eligibility criteria. So that includes inclusion and exclusion criteria. Basically, how do you decide what to include in the review, right? That has to be decided before you even start. You have to have explicit reproducible methodology, including a systematic search to identify all the studies that meet that predefined criteria. You have to assess the validity of the included studies findings. Once you have your included studies, there's a systematic coding and synthesis of the characteristics of those studies and the findings. And then if possible, doing a statistical or quantitative synthesis, right? That's that meta-analysis, if it's possible. So another way to look at this is a systematic review is a study of studies. It is a research methodology, and the literature search itself provides you with the pool of the potential subjects. And the quality of the systematic review is going to be dependent on the research studies included. That's why the search itself is so important. If the search is not comprehensive enough, if it's not reproducible, you may miss studies, and that way, the systematic review will be incomplete. And then each study that you include has to be appraised for quality by the review team. So here's just a visual representation of the systematic review process, kind of looking like the puzzle pieces, and how they go through the systematic review process. And then they're put together into this final product and then disseminated, right, shared with others. So how do you decide if a systematic review is the right fit for your project, right? There are some considerations. Mostly the research question is really what's going to tell you if it's the right fit. So why do a systematic review? So a couple of reasons are if you're trying to answer a specific question by analyzing all the available studies that have attempted to answer that exact same question, to inform a practice or decision-making policies or further research, confirm or refute if current practice is based on relevant evidence, right? What is currently being done in a field, and is that based on the existing evidence? Establish the quality of available evidence, right? How robust or how methodologically sound is the evidence that's currently available? And then address uncertainty or variations in practice that might be occurring. Again, if something's happening in a certain discipline and there's not really a standard way of doing something, maybe a systematic review will help bring, clarity or light to, what's actually being done in that field, to help create some standardization. So, there are many different types of reviews that someone could undertake. And it is really a spectrum where on the left side here, you have your traditional narrative reviews, where you don't really have to describe your methods. It's not as robust, but the purpose of that traditional review is really to give an overview of a topic. Once we start passing this part right here on the spectrum, like if you have a mapping review, integrated review, or scoping review that are kind of mapping the literature, at that point, you should be describing your methodology. And then you have your systematic reviews, right, where at this point, the studies that you include in the review should be answering the same research question. And then, of course, the meta-analysis is where those studies can be quantitatively combined. So there are multiple options. It doesn't always have to be a systematic review. So hopefully this table will help in kind of differentiating them. These are kind of like the big three. The traditional reviews are going to be those narrative reviews. And there's like a picture of cherries there because it's more like a cherry picking where maybe the search is not very systematic. You put a couple keywords in a database, you find a couple articles, you save them as you go. You don't really have criteria as to why you pick something, and you're not keeping track of your search, or why you didn't include something. So it's very different. And again, the purpose of those is to give maybe an overview. So on the right side here, we have our scoping reviews and systematic reviews. These are the big two that we get asked about quite often. So the scoping reviews, we'll talk about what those are in a moment. But a basic definition is that they're trying to map the literature. What does the evidence actually look like? So whereas a systematic review, that needle in the haystack picture, you're trying to find studies that answer a very specific question. So both of these do require and ask for a protocol before you even begin, right? And we'll talk about what the protocol is in a moment. There are protocol registries where people register their protocol before they do their project. Prospero is the big one for systematic reviews. They don't accept scoping reviews, but there are other places to register those. Both do require explicit, transparent, peer-reviewed search strategies. Both require data extraction forms where you're extracting the data from the included studies. As far as mandatory critical appraisal, right, looking for risk of bias or the quality of the studies, Systematic reviews, it is mandatory to do that. Scoping reviews, it's optional. And then where you're synthesizing the findings from those individual studies, that's going to be more of a systematic review thing. Since the scoping reviews may include studies that are not as alike to each other, because the purpose of that type of review is a little bit different. So the research question is kind of going to tell you what review is the best fit. It's going to inform all of your decisions, especially when you're creating the protocol. And it's going to give you with the rationale and the purpose as to why even do the review in the first place. So again, we get a lot of questions about systematic or scoping reviews. Sometimes people come to us and they think they want to do a systematic, but their question is more scoping or vice versa. So here on the left, we have systematic review questions. They're usually very precise, but they can be broad or narrow in scope. They should be answerable, that there's enough evidence out there to help you answer the question. The question itself has multiple components, or it's usually a complex question. It addresses the feasibility, appropriateness, meaningfulness, or effectiveness of a certain treatment or practice or policy. Can be stated as objectives of the review, and it usually falls into a question framework. Like in the health sciences, PICO is often used. And then the scoping review questions can be specific, maybe broad or narrow in scope. They'll also have multiple components. But what I really want to draw the attention to is the difference in their aims, right? Where the systematic review is trying to address the feasibility, appropriateness, etc., of a certain practice. And the scoping review is trying to identify the types of available evidence, or maybe it's trying to clarify key concepts or definitions, determine how research is typically conducted, identify key characteristics or factors related to a concept, analyze gaps in the knowledge base, or even serve as a precursor to systematic reviews. And typically, scoping reviews have a different question framework, which is PCC, like population, concept, or context. So here we're going to have some examples that hopefully illustrate this a little bit better. So let's say that our topic is horticultural therapy and mental health. So systematic review question, and these are from actual published reviews. So a systematic review question would look like, in this topic would be, do individuals with a mental health condition who receive horticultural therapy significantly improve their occupational performance in the following categories, right? Very specific there, as compared to those who did not receive this intervention. So again, very specific, right? It's looking at those with mental health condition. It's looking at how horticultural therapy can improve their occupational performance. So it's going to fall into that PICO question framework. And the goal is that you're trying to find other studies that have tried to answer the same question. Now, scoping review, right, on the same topic, is going to have different goals, right? So the objective of this particular review, where this is coming from, was to scope out the evidence on horticulture as a therapeutic medium. The secondary objective was to examine the evidence for horticulture gardening as an occupation-based intervention in mental health. And then it has these three questions, right? It's asking, what is the scope of horticultural therapy in mental health practice? How is the impact measured? And do occupational therapy interventions based upon horticulture facilitate the recovery of individuals with mental health conditions? So two very different questions, even though they're on the same topic. So then this would kind of tell you, okay, a systematic review is the best bet if it's a question like the one on the left, or if your question is more, you're trying to map the literature, then a scoping review is going to be the better fit. So we're going to have these research question frameworks, right? Your question should fall into one of these. These are some of the big three, but there might be others out there. For the health sciences is going to be PICO, right? Where each letter stands for something that you should be considering in that question. So in the example, in middle-aged overweight women, we have our P, right? Our population is the use of compression stockings, right? Our intervention during long flights, effective in preventing deep vein thrombosis. That's our outcome. And then the comparison is to in-flight exercises. There may not always be a comparison, but it does happen often that it's comparing either to like a gold standard, standard therapy, or no therapy. Then you have SPICE, which is typically used in the social sciences, right? You have the context of the question, who are their users, what is being done for the users, the comparison, right? What are the alternatives? And then what measurement are you using to determine that intervention success? So the example in assisted living facilities, we have our setting. Do therapy dog visits, that's the intervention, as opposed to no therapy dog visits, the comparison. Reduce feelings of loneliness, right? That's what we're measuring in older residents, and that's our perspective, right? The users. And then SPIDER is for qualitative research, right? Where it's asking you for the sample, the phenomenon of interest, the design, evaluation, and research type. So again, for first-time mothers, right, that's our sample. Does antenatal education, phenomenon of interest, positively affect their delivery experience, right? That's what we're evaluating. The design are through interview and surveys, and the research type is qualitative. So we talked about the research question, which is kind of like the first thing you should consider. But the other thing is, do you have a team of people, right? Systematic reviews are not conducted by individuals. They're conducted by teams. You should have at least 3 people to help you not only divide the work, but that task should be completed independently by at least 2 people to help minimize errors and bias. And then an additional person can help resolve any conflicts or ties. You also want to include a variety of expertise if possible, project management, people who are versed in systematic review methodology, subject matter expertise, an information specialist or librarian, that's us, right, to help with the search, and even a statistician, right, for the meta-analysis. The other consideration is time. These projects can take 12 months, 18 months, depending on how many results you're screening, right? How long it takes to develop the protocol, to develop the search. This is a screenshot from the Cochrane collaboration and what their timeline typically looks like, right? Where it takes maybe 2 months to prepare a protocol. The searches, developing them, could take a couple months. And then running the searches, doing the screening, data collection, right, between months 3 and 10, right? So it's a long-term project. So that is something you have to consider before deciding to do it. All right, so now, thankfully, there are standards and guidelines to help conduct and report systematic reviews. I'm going to pause for just a second in case there are any questions.
I don't have any questions at the moment.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on here. So there are guidelines, like I said, to help you conduct systematic reviews. Several organizations as well as researchers have developed instructions for this. So they'll have guidelines for how to plan your systematic review, so protocol development, how to report that plan, which are ways to report the protocol, how to conduct the systematic review, and then reporting and writing up the manuscript after you complete it. So there is a handout, and we'll send it out after the session, where we have put here some tools to help you decide what review to conduct, and then of course the standards and guidelines. So we've tried to include some for different disciplines, not for just for health sciences as well. So here we have like Campbell Collaboration for Social Sciences, as we mentioned, the Epicenter for Social Policy, Center for Evidence-Based Management, which is for management and leadership, environmental science, education research. So some of those will provide you with guidelines on what systematic reviews or evidence syntheses look like in these disciplines. So in addition to guidelines to conduct, you'll also have guidelines on how to report. So if you remember the characteristics when we said that it had to be reproducible, that's why reporting everything that you did in the project is essential so that someone could reproduce what you did. So one of these reporting guidelines is PRISMA, which is the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analyses. So this is a screenshot from that PRISMA checklist, and it's kind of telling you all the things that should be included or reported in a systematic review report. So you'll see here kind of like the different sections, title, abstract, introduction, methodology. It gives you a description of what that is, and then you would write in, okay, on page 3 of the manuscript, you'll find, the search strategy methods, for example. So here's the rest of that checklist with the results, what should be in the discussion, and then any other information. So we're going to use a published example to help us illustrate some of the systematic review process. So here we have one on the experiences of working as early career allied health professionals and doctors in rural and remote environments. It's a qualitative systematic review. So we're going to dive into that full text here. And we see in their methods that they're using the JBI methodology, right, which is one of the ones that we've linked on the handout, and that they're using Prisma to report what they did. So we just kind of wanted to show a real world example of kind of these standards and guidelines being used. Okay, so now we're going to move into the systematic review process, right, and go through each step. This is what it looks like visually, right, where you're identifying the issue and determining the question, writing the plan for the review, the protocol, you search for the study, you sift and select the studies based on your criteria, extract the data, assess the quality of those studies, combine the data, whether it's a narrative synthesis, and if you can, a meta-analysis, and then you're concluding those findings. And again, making that big puzzle and disseminating it out to other practitioners and stakeholders in that are interested in that. So again, this is an overview of those steps. So step one, right, the pre-review. This is kind of where you're trying to decide if this is the right project for you. So assembling a team, again, thinking about the multidisciplinary expertise and solidifying the roles and expectations with the team. Formulating your research question, right? Is there a gap in the evidence that you can help fill with that question? Are there enough studies to do a systematic review, right? So this requires some exploratory searching. And then that question should fall into one of those question frameworks. And then another big one is searching for existing systematic reviews. Has there already been published, a systematic review published on this? Is there one currently being done, right? Looking for protocols, systematic reviews in process. So if there's an existing systematic review that's well done and pretty current, then maybe it's, you should pivot, right? Change the question a little bit, because maybe there doesn't need to be another systematic review right now. But if there is existing systematic reviews, reasons to do another one is if it's older or needs an update, or if it can be improved upon. So the second step is to plan. So this little figure here, right? The researcher's like, how far did you get? And the other researcher's like, I've got the conclusions. I just have to write the protocol, which is not what we want, right? Because we don't want to kind of bias our findings. That's why the protocol kind of keeps us transparent, right, in doing these projects. So you really have to make sure you have that plan in place, that you're putting all your effort into making sure you've made every decision, and then you just follow the plan. Any deviations from the plan have to be discussed and disclosed. So developing the protocol, right? Again, this is your plan or blueprint for the systematic review project. It must be done before you begin the actual project itself, and it helps you make the decisions for the project in advance. It helps keep the team on track, know which tools and software you will use, if any training is needed by anybody on the team. This ensures transparency and minimizes potential bias. And if you register it, which is highly encouraged, it can help avoid duplication of research efforts. So again, we have that handout I showed earlier that has different resources to kind of help you develop a protocol. So the protocol is going to include the rationale, right, or reason for the review question, the question in PICO format or other elements depending on your framework, and that each element is well defined. Your inclusion exclusion criteria, some common inclusion exclusion criteria, right, is listed here. Some things you want to be careful with as far as date, publication date. If you're going to limit by that when you're doing your searches, it has to be justified. Maybe a new treatment started in 2005 that it was approved by the FDA. Okay, so it's worth, kind of cutting the search maybe between 2000 to present. Like, it has to have some reason and not just an arbitrary decision to limit like to the last 10 years, for example. Exposure, intervention of interest, right? That all has to be defined because when you're looking through the studies, you're trying to find the ones that have the exact same intervention. Geographic location. That also should be, if that's relevant to the question, then that's fine. But typically, you don't limit to a certain location. You don't limit by language, right? Sometimes we'll see like limited to just English only. But that kind of leaves out a lot of the literature that's in English, in languages other than English. And that may introduce some bias if you do that. The participants, again, make sure that's well defined so you know what you're including or excluding. Sometimes we'll see people say we included peer review only, but again, this kind of cuts out some of that gray literature that's not traditionally published. So again, it might introduce some bias into your review. You're looking at any reported outcomes. Again, your question, it should be well defined, what the setting is, the study designs that you're looking at. If you're only looking at controlled trials. Typically, maybe you'll limit to just that. If you're kind of open, then you don't really limit to that. And then type of publication. Sometimes people, remove letters, review articles, editorials, things like that. Where you search information sources, which we'll talk about. Your search strategy also is going to be in the protocol. How you plan to manage your data. How are you going to do your selection process, your screening, how you plan to collect your data, tools and checklists to assess risk of bias for each included study, and then how the data will be synthesized. Also, a big part of this is thinking about if you're going to publish, where do you plan to publish? Which journals are you considering? Do they publish systematic reviews? So all of these things have to be decided before you even begin. Protocol registration. We do recommend to register the protocol. Some journals may even require to have a Prospero ID because that means you've registered the protocol. Adherence to the protocol shall help you avoid that bias. Published results can be compared with what was intended at the registration of that particular protocol. The protocol itself should be high quality, registered, posted early in the review process. And this allows other researchers to access the registered protocol. You can also search for other, systematic reviews in process. So it is an important practice. And then according to Prospero, you should register the protocol before you begin the data extraction when you start the systematic review. You can document changes to the protocol, but again, you have to make sure that they're documented and the why and the justification for that change. And as I mentioned, the protocol itself could be a publication. Some journals do publish systematic review protocols. So our published example here, they let us know that their protocol was published in a journal, and it was also registered with Prospero. And there you see that they have the little ID for Prospero. And like I said, this is a screenshot in the Prospero registry. And then down here, they actually published the protocol itself before they actually did the systematic review. And then they published the systematic review. So they got 2 publications out of this project. All right, so the next step, right after you've completed the protocol, is to do the search. So I'm going to turn it over to Ramses to take us through the search process.
All right, search. Let me share. All right, the search process. So, systematic reviews require a thorough, objective, and reproducible search from a range of sources. I'm going to explain in a little bit, what each of one of those highlighted terms, thorough, objective, and reproducible search, what they really mean. And they use a range of sources to identify as many eligible studies as possible, within resource limits. So this is a major factor that distinguishes systematic reviews from traditional narrative reviews, which helps to minimize bias and achieve more reliable, estimate of the effects of certain uncertainties. So it is a very broad, all-encompassing deep dive. The aim of a systematic review is to identify all relevant studies, published or not, on a given topic. So searching should be based on the principle of comprehensiveness. Once again, big, we're throwing a wide net with the widest reasonable collection of information sources that are considered appropriate. So, what do we mean when we talk about some of these terms? So thorough, by that we mean we're going to search in multiple databases. We're going to use a combination of keywords and text words. We're also going to search through the subject headings. There is going to be some supplementary, searching. Okay, so by objective, we means we're going to use search terms that include variations in terminology, and we're going to do excuse me, all that we can to avoid bias in the term selection. Okay, by reproducible, we mean that the search string that we build should be able to just be like copy and pasted by anybody else, in this case, the review committee, into those databases, and the results should be reproducible. Now, there might be a little bit of a difference because of the, like the time frame in which they are, the searches are ran. But by reproducible means somebody should just be able to copy, paste, and get the same results that you've gotten. Um, so the documents are gonna, we're gonna search all the details. We're gonna include the database platform and information about the database. We're gonna record, like meticulous record how the search strategy was executed, and we're gonna provide the date that all of the searches happened on. So the research question and eligibility criteria will determine which information sources, or databases to search. And that'll inform your search strategy, your concepts to search, keywords, synonyms, subject headings, all that good stuff. So, which databases do we look into? It all really depends where, what your topic is. So, for example, you always have some core databases, especially for health sciences like Medline, Embase, Cochrane Central, Web of Science, which also actually contains a lot of, social sciences and actually psychology too for branding. And in CINAHL. So we also have subject-specific databases that you can look into it. So you have PsycInfo, Sports Discus, Petro, International Pharmaceutical Abstract. So you're gonna choose from a combination of things. There are, regional databases like LILACs, Cielo, African Medicus, Index Medicus, or you can also search in gray literature, which is essentially anything that would not be housed on just your regular databases. That could include .gov, so just clinical.gov. You can look at the World Health Organization International Clinical Triads, ProQuest dissertation and thesis. So everything that's not, quote unquote, a database article. Okay, so now, I should have given you a heads up, a warning about this. This is going to be weird and scary, but if you look at this, Brandy, this is what your search strategy will eventually look like. So I just wanted to show you this just to kind of give you a little bit of the shock value, and then at the same time let you know that we are gonna build, this. You are gonna build this if you do a systematic review, and in the next few slides, we'll kind of show you how to get here. So what this is a search string that we put together for the Embase database. But if you look at it, you'll see like it, you have all these ors, you have this EXP, which means explode, and then you have like regular terms and weird looking terms. We're gonna show you in a little bit how to make this not weird at all and absolutely doable. Okay, so now, what are the searching steps? Okay, first we're going to identify the main concepts from the research question. Then we're gonna harvest those terms. You're gonna create the search strategy for one database, which it was, the previous slide. We're gonna translate it to other databases being searched. Then we're gonna run all the searches on the same day. They have to be run on the same day. You're going to export your citations and then remove your duplicates. And As a reminder, keep notes and document all the steps of the process. That is one of the, one of the stipulations. Just make sure you document everything. Okay. Now, as far as identifying, let's go, little by little here. So identifying main concepts from the research question. Let's do that first. Usually the main, we have all these mnemonic devices that can help you. PICO seems to be one of the, if not the most popular, which stands for population or problem or patient, intervention, comparison or control, and then outcome. Sometimes we have, PIO, PO, just population, intervention, and outcome when there's no control. Sometimes for the social sciences, then, things are, obviously going to change a little bit. So we have, for example, setting, perspective, intervention, comparison, and evaluation. So it's good to know which, when you look at your research question, which one that, that breaks into. So let's look at an example, okay? This is from an actual, systematic review. So here's your research question. What is the impact of diet and physical activity on the gut microbiome for the treatment of obesity or overweight in children and adolescents? So let's start by splitting into, look at our all of our key concepts. So we have So our population or our problem is overweight, obese. Our population also, we have two populations here, children and adolescents. The intervention would be diet and exercise, and the outcome is the effect on the gut microbiome. So we have identified, we have a PO type question. And once you have that, then you start identifying your search terms. Now, for that, for the next series of steps, I'm gonna wait, Joanna. This is where I turn it back to you, right?
Yes, I think so.
Yes. Okay. So I'll turn it over to Joanna now. Let me stop sharing. Okay.
Okay, so please let me know if you can see.
Yes.
Okay. So here we are going to be at the point where we need to harvest our search terms. And this is important that we throw a net as far and as encompassing as possible with our concepts, with the terms that are related to each one of the search concepts that we had associated with our PCOT or PO or research question. And at that point, we can mix the natural language and the controlled vocabulary. So these two groups of terms are very specific and very unique. Each one of them has its own characteristics and ways to mine terms for them. So this is where we want to go deeper into each one. As you can see, here in the database, this is, for example, like one screenshot from a database record where you have the title and the authors and the abstract for a specific article, and you can identify from the record how the natural language terms are available in the title, in the abstract, sometimes even in the keywords provided by the author, right? Because they are the terms that come naturally in the way you would describe the term, or anyone, maybe even in a not professional or in a more common vocabulary. And then there are the terms that are available through the database, which are available through the database indexes, the thesaurus, and those are the major subjects that you can see to the right. Some databases make it very easy, and this is why we always recommend to use our library databases, because you can extract the terms easily from the record and from the description of the database. When you're trying to find your natural language terms, this is the moment when you have to brainstorm and think about any synonyms, any related terms, spelling variations, Even if you have any plural or any variations in the plural or singular or in the spelling, it is very useful to spell out the acronym or to use the acronym itself in combination, because sometimes it appears in one or another way in the articles, and other using narrower terms or broader terms. So this is something that is up to the researcher and to you evaluating and finding if sometimes, because you are not finding enough, um, encompassing articles that are from a broader term or from a more specific term could bring you more. It's very useful typically to find a few articles that are a good match for your inclusion, your exclusion criteria, that are kind of the perfect articles aligned, like your sample articles for your research topic, and extract the terms from those articles. Those are excellent sources of resources for literature, for vocabulary. Also, you can use other tools like even AI, ChatGPT, or any control vocabulary out there that could help you generate ideas. And you will always have to evaluate yourself as a researcher if a term is a good fit or not. So not necessarily because you have synonyms, all synonyms apply to a topic. Any question with this so far?
Nope, not at the moment.
Okay. But then we entered the controlled vocabulary territory, which is a little less known, and is that each database has a list of terms, a thesaurus, an index, and they have different names for each controlled vocabulary, and this is what it makes it not that standard and a little bit more complicated, but we can highlight the main databases that we use today, and we can kind of demystify this aspect a little bit. So here you can see Embase, how their vocabulary is called M3. For CINAHL, we have CINAHL subject headings. For PsycInfo, ERIC, we have a specific thesaurus. Medline has a map term to subject heading. It's a tool that does the same process of mapping the terms to the subject heading. And for PubMed, we have the MeSH database, which is the medical library subject headings. So each one of these databases, as I mentioned, has a different way to locate this vocabulary. And here you can see for PubMed how it is very easy from the search screen to locate the heading, the MeSH vocabulary tool. You just have to click on it where the arrow is pointing. And this will allow you to search a MeSH tool that is totally searchable. You can type your terms up at the search box and get a list of results where you are going to select the entries that match your concept. So if you are looking for cleft palate, but then you also find cleft lip, you're like, okay, these two, I could combine them. They are both good matches. And then to the right, there is an option to combine the terms using the different Boolean operators. So you have the option to combine them, add them to the search box using or and, or your decision. It's up to you to customize the search before clicking search PubMed. Very useful. And this is a good search tool to start your search. It is a very good to determine what is going to be your search before going to the other platforms and translate your search. So we sometimes recommend that you do that, and that this is something that you can also, once you select another platform, like right now, we are transitioning over to Embase. Embase is also a large biomedical database subscribed by the FIU libraries that you can use. And in Embase, you have the opportunity to use the M3 up at the top. You can see the second link to the right. And they also they feature a list of synonyms, which adds a lot of value to this moment when you're brainstorming. So say that while you're mining for these topics, you're still very open. This is not by any means the definite search. You're still like checking what's out there, what are the right terms under each database. So now that you have already explored, say, PubMed, and you have your mesh terms, you could use here in Embase the M3 and do the comparison. And it may or it may not be the same list of control vocabulary terms. So it could be that the terms are identical from database to database, or they may have huge variation or slight variation. And this matters because it's never the same a term than with a spelling, with another term, with another spelling. So when you are finally selecting your control vocabulary, you have to let the database know that what you're searching, it's in this control vocabulary field. In other words, you are going to search for a subject, and you have to let the database know in the syntax that you are searching for cleft palate in the subject field and not anywhere or in the keywords, etc. All right, here's another example for Ovid, which is one of our largest vendors too. We have different databases under this vendor, and one is Medline. So you could search Medline through Ovid, through our membership, our subscription, through the A to Z databases list. And these are the databases that we're using today are all available through FIU libraries, through the medical library, and they are all available for free, by the way. Here under Ovid is where you can combine and map the terms to subject headings when you're searching in advance. And under the advanced search screen, there is this little checkbox that we have pointing an arrow to it, so that when you search for that term, the database will give you a list of the associated terms that you can include or exclude or combine using different operators, and then run your search. So these are some of the main ones, but we have a mix and match of them here. And in this other screen, we have added CINAHL because it's one of the nursing and health sciences databases, and we typically have a lot of these type of questions in our systematic review searches. CINAHL has a little tool. It's the CINAHL terms, although in many of these databases, the PubMed mesh terms are also a field. So finding the mesh terms in biomedical research, it's kind of very pivotal for the rest of your search, because then you can convert, you can translate your search easily to the others. Once you have explored your terms, we typically recommend that, and this is a very useful advice across all the literature searches, is that you create a table and you divide each one of your terms into concepts. And for each concept, you break it down into keywords, the natural language keywords, and each one of the columns for each one of the databases. This is a visual for you to see the difference, for you to catch any missing terms, for you to also make sure that, for example, when you are finding the CINAHL subject heading for each one of the databases, you make sure that you include those terms as keywords. As repetitive as it sounds, it is important because having the mesh terms as keywords guarantees that maybe the article has not been recovered, has not been classified as the subject term gut microbiota, for example. But if in the natural language, somewhere around the abstract or the title, gut microbiota appears, then the article will be pulled and will be recovered in your results. Remember that we want to be exhaustive here, because this is not a typical literature search where 5, 10 articles are good enough, but this is a systematic review. So you want to find every single article across the literature, even back in time, even back when the concept was maybe treated with a different term, with a different vocabulary. You want to include all those historical evolutions of terms, all those spellings, so that everything, you maximize your chances to retrieve results. Any questions with this as we are moving on to the next screen?
No, pretty clear. Thank you.
Clear? Okay, good. I'm hitting next here. Okay, here is back to the basic, how we can combine this wonderful exhaustive list of terms that we already got. Because we don't do anything if we have the perfect comprehensive list of every single term that may appear in the literature, and we need to know how to combine them in the correct syntax as well for each database. So a basic element is to know how to use your ands and ors and not, which are sometimes not aligned with the what logic or our everyday life will indicate. So using and, it's a way to narrow the search. It's a way for you to combine two or more different concepts, but making sure that you recover the articles that match both conditions. So if you treat and in your mind as a condition, as a requisite, it's like it's your standard. You want and to recover not just the articles that talk about concept A or concept B, but about both. So this is what is powerful about and it could be also a Boolean operator that could leave you without results or with very few if you are not mindful. It's kind of the danger of using and is that every and that you're adding a condition. So you want to start from broad and be very general and then start adding more and more ands as you search. As you can see here at the bottom, we have the gut microbiome and exercise example from the search. But if you're not recovering enough, or when you want to be comprehensive, you use or as a way to say that you want anything matching either one or the other. And this is where the database will bring you a lot more results, because you can say, I am open to having results on articles that talk about children, also about adolescents, and you can also start adding more and more ors, combining it with synonyms, with tools for the search, like using truncation, using variation of the terms. And then we have not, which is the operator to exclude, to not to use a certain topic if it's bringing you too many results. And not is not recommended in general for systematic reviews. If you are going to use it, it has to be very carefully. And it is a way to exclude maybe when you are getting many results that are bringing you what we call noise, like results from other fields. So you, in that case, for example, you could be like, oh, I want articles about exercise, but not about medical exercise or about math exercise. So you will be not math exercises as an example, or as we can see here on the slide, as saying, I want articles about dementia, not Alzheimer's. And that will automatically eliminate those. Again, because it's a systematic review, you want to be careful with the automatic eliminations. Pretty much what you prefer is to have everything and then manually through the screening stage that we will cover later, take care of excluding those. Here we can see how the database Embase, which Ramses already displayed earlier when we didn't know a lot about this, it looked scary. Now it's a little bit more clear that in lines 1 to 4, we have the 4 different concepts for this search. So we have on each line the breakdown of the combination of the terms that we gather for each one of the control vocabulary and the just the vocabulary that is available, open terms or lists from the lists that are from the natural language. So when you combine here the diet/exp, it's going to be the syntax for Embase, letting the database know that you want the term diet associated to the subject, and so on. So you have the whole combination of all the different concepts. And then at the bottom, once we have the title, abstract, keyword terms, and we also have the control vocabulary terms associated for each one of the concepts, we are at the point where we can mix the 4 lines and ask the database to generate a total list of results combining them all. Here it's a little easier on the eye to see the difference between the syntax for subjects and the syntax for natural language. And here we can see a comparison of each one of the databases and how something so clear as a combined search could become very different in each one of them, depending, because each one of them has a different syntax, a different way to label the fields. So that's where you see the highlights on how in Embase they use /x for subjects, for example, and CNOW has the master headings, and the Scopus has the title abstract keyword. Back to Scopus, this is the actual screenshot from the database, and you can see the beauty. It's scary, but now it's less, that you have all the different terms combined, and you have in some lines combined intermediate searches until on line 13, you end up combining all the searches like 3, 6, and 9, and 12, so that you end up having your total number of over 3,000 results. As you can see, what we're doing here are very encompassing searches, and what you want is ideally to have hundreds, if not thousands of results. That's why we take all this care and go so in detail into the search stage. Then for exporting the results, every database also has a different way to do it. But in general, you want to always look for a site or export the results. And it's typically something that once you highlight the result that you want to export, which is probably all of them, you want to go for the RIS file. The files that are in RIS format are, say, a way to convert all the list of results, all your articles, into a format that is easy to export and upload in another platform such as Covidence, Zotero, EndNote. So if you are planning to use a citation manager as an intermediate stage, you can export it into that using the RIS, and or you can also directly take it into Covidence using the RIS. So RIS files are your best friend to export from the databases into these platforms. And I think that with this, I am turning it over back to Ramses.
Okay, I'm back. I was looking for my to unmute myself. Let me just go back to and share. Okay, so as usual, we're showing you here some of the checklist for the Prism method. So, just you see some of the documentation that you have to do. For example, you're looking at your, citing your information sources, your databases, any other registry that you used. Also, your search strategies. All of those things that need to be documented. Now, we're going back to our published example, just to show you that, the way that this is done in the, methods or the methodology portion of the paper. So there is, a section that is directed towards a search strategy. So as you can see here, they named the databases that they used. They looked at and they mentioned the date that the searches were ran, and the additional databases, the translations for each one of the databases. So that is one way to, document that particular process. Also, they showed, and once again, this is from an actual publication, they showed one version of their search string for Medline. So you can see all of that. It usually goes into the appendixes of the paper once it is published. And also they talked about, where the results were loaded into and where they were screened. So speaking of that, also from the screening process, it'll tell you, they're showing you what is called a Prisma flowchart, which is, how many articles or records were identified, how many were screened by just title and abstract, how many of them, made it up to, full text, all the duplicates that were removed, all of this needs to be documented after the screening process. So speaking of the screening process, how do we do this? So the screening process, so all search results should be reviewed by at least two people independently of each other. And this helps to minimize bias. So each person is going to independently decide whether or not this uh, this particular article follows the protocol, the previously done protocol, and whether it passes to the next stage. Now, a third person can serve as a tiebreaker, if there's any disagreement. So, reviewers are evaluating whether the study meets, as I said, the pre-specified inclusion or exclusion criteria decided during the protocol. Now, step one, you examine all titles and abstracts for all the search results. So if the study meets the inclusion criteria, it goes into the next round. If it does not, then it is excluded, and as always, document the reason why. Then step two, you retrieve the full text for potentially relevant studies. This should still be independently reviewed by at least two members separately, and then make the final decisions on the study inclusion. For any excluded studies, also, once again, document the reason why it did not make the final cut. Now, one of the softwares that works really well for this, this part of the process is called Covidence. So Covidence, you actually get it for free here. It's available for FIU, and just kind of wanted to show you a few, you know, screen grabs of what this looks like. So, for example, you can use this to, import your references. Then they go, you have the two separate, you know, places where you can screen it. You can do the title and abstract screening here, and the ones that make it automatically make it into the full text review. So for a title and abstract screening, this is what it looks like. So everyone, as I said, we're looking at this independently. You get to look at the title, at the abstract, and it's either a no, a maybe, or a yes. You do have here the ability to write in your inclusion and exclusion criteria. You could resolve if one of the reviewers clicks on yes and the other one clicks on no, then it automatically goes here to resolve conflicts for the third, the tiebreaker reviewer to look at it. And if all reviewers agree on yes, then it makes it to the full text screen. And that, you have your digital object identifier or any, other way to access the full text. And then once again, it's same thing. Either include or exclude. You do have your tiebreakers or resolve conflicts. You can add highlights. You can add inclusion exclusion criteria, and if you click on like no, like exclude, you actually have a little drop down menu of your asserted inclusion exclusion criteria, so that then it actually automatically starts forming um um that Prisma flow chart there, this. So it actually will, Covidence will do this automatically, providing that you document every, single reason why it was not. So here you'll see it, wrong study design, pediatric population, wrong population, wrong language, whatever it was. So, and for the, the published example, the way that do this is you go to your, data screening and extraction. So, duplicates will remove. This is also part of the methodology section in that same article we have been looking at. And the abstract was screening by, the two authors, and they were, screened on whatever here, the JBI data extraction tool. So. Also from, wait, it says Daisy Stern? No, not yet, right? This is Toolmind. Uh, so yes, and this is once again from that article we were looking at. This is their Prisma, the final Prisma flowchart. You see how many there were originally identified, the ones that were deduplicated, the ones that did not make it the final cut, and their their inclusion exclusion criteria from um, the protocol. Now we go back to Daisy. Wait, let me stop sharing. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Ramses and Joanna. So we're here on the home stretch of these last couple of steps. So once you've designed the search, you ran the search all on the same day, you collected all of those records, you put them into Covidence, you screen them, right? And now you got to that final number that you're going to include in your paper. You have to extract the data from those studies. So collecting the data from the included studies, when you're developing the protocol, the team decides what data should be collected from the included studies. You can use a spreadsheet to help you collect that information or use a form, and I'll show an example in just a moment. But typically the items that you're going to consider for data collection from each study is going to be the identification information, so the author, the title of the journal it's published in, confirm the eligibility for each study, right? That's met the inclusion criteria. What study design did they use? Who were the participants? What was the setting? What was the intervention or comparison? What were the measured outcomes? And what were the actual results? So typically this will kind of fall into a table. Covidence does have a data extraction tool where it will have like a form, and then it will be next to that included study with the full text. So it makes it easy to pull out the information that you need. So here's that published example again. They're letting us know that they use the JBI qualitative data extraction tool. It sounds super fancy, but it actually is just a form for qualitative studies. And what they did is that, let's say for this published example, that they had 30 studies that they included after all the screening. They fill out the form for each of those 30 studies. 2 people fill out for each of the studies to minimize the bias and the errors. And they basically fill this out, for that particular study, what was the methods, what was the phenomenon of interest, the setting, and everything else that's going to be relevant to that. So once they fill out all those forms, they're going to put all the information into the table. So every systematic review, scoping reviews should have a table with all the included studies and then all the information that they extracted from each of the studies. So then once you've extracted the data from all the studies, you have to assess the quality of all the included records there, or studies, I should say. So another way of thinking about this is a risk of bias, a quality assessment, a critical appraisal. Those terms are used typically interchangeably. This helps establish the transparency of evidence synthesis results, right? Because you're telling people, okay, well, how good, were these studies, right? So that they know if they can trust the results. The goal of the assessment is to identify and report any biases for each of the studies. And the quality assessment of any study is to consider the following: the appropriateness of the study design to the research objective. Did those two match? The risk of bias and any other issues related to study quality. So the choice of the outcome measure, any statistical issues, quality of reporting, quality of intervention, journalizability. So the good thing is that there are tools or checklists to help you do this for different study designs. So we do have, again, on that handout, some of the big ones that people use, but there are many more. So, for example, in the real world systematic review that we have here that we've been pointing to, they let us know that their quality appraisal, they use the JBI Critical Appraisal Checklist for qualitative research. Again, the checklists are going to be based on the study design. So it's not just one checklist. You have to say, okay, I'm looking at a clinical trial. I need to find the checklist that's appropriate for clinical trials to assess risk of bias. I'm looking at a cohort study. I need to find the checklist that best is for a cohort study. So it's basically, again, a form, right? And it's filled out for each of the included studies, and it's just asking questions about, the congruity between the philosophical perspective and research methods, the research methods and the research question, right? And that's being filled out by the team. And then this particular published systematic review actually kind of summarized, and that's good. That's a best practice, and it's going to look different. Like this one looks like this. Sometimes you'll see it with red, green, and yellow as an indicator of quality there. So here they kind of summarized all the questions and let us know how many studies met that criteria. So once you've assessed for quality, right, now it's kind of you got to put it all together. So you're going to summarize and analyze the data with a narrative synthesis, right, where you're analyzing the relationships between the studies and the overall assessment of how robust the evidence is, right? It's typically a descriptive summary. That's going to always be the case. You're going to have the table as well. And then if possible, right, if the studies are alike enough to each other to be combined statistically, then you'll also have the meta-analysis. So our published example, they didn't do a meta-analysis, but they did do a meta-synthesis as they had 30 papers that they were looking at with 331 findings, right? So they developed some categories for the different studies here. So you can kind of see their findings here, and then the different categories that they put them in, depending on whether it was allied health professionals or medicine. And then you have to write up the findings, right? Once you've synthesized them. So Prisma is great for this. As I mentioned before, that checklist tells you everything that should be in a systematic review report. And the checklist has the place for you to say, okay, where did we talk about this? Oh, on page 4. So the checklist is going to be helpful for that. If you're submitting to a journal, make sure that they do accept systematic reviews and what are their particular requirements for the systematic review. And again, this should be done in that pre-review protocol phase. Here's just a suggested structure of a systematic review report, which is going to, follow Prisma pretty closely. You have your title, the executive summary, right, which is your abstract. And then in the main text, what are the things that you should be including? And of course, some of that additional information there at the end. So here's our published example. Their write-up is the published paper in this particular journal. So in addition to checking the quality of individual studies, systematic reviews themselves should also be checked for quality. Just because a systematic review is published doesn't mean that it was well done or doesn't have any faults. So there are actual checklists for you to check the quality of systematic reviews. And this could be particularly helpful if you're looking at existing systematic reviews and deciding, okay, does this need an update or can this be improved upon, right? If you're looking at their methods. Also, there's a review type called umbrella reviews, where you're doing a systematic review of systematic reviews. And this is when there's been a lot of them already published. So we do have several checklists for this. Here's just a screenshot of one of them, the Robust tool, where it's looking for the quality of the search strategy. Did they search multiple databases? Did the search match the research question? Did the group report, how they selected the studies? So even systematic reviews need to be checked for quality as well. So some takeaways and recap as we wrap up here. Systematic reviews are research studies, so very different from narrative or literature reviews. And the goal is to identify all the studies that answer a specific research question and then combining all of those studies. And hopefully they're very alike to each other. Systematic reviews are one of the highest levels of evidence because of the way that they're conducted. They're important to practitioners, decision makers, and then it's just one of the many different types of evidence syntheses, right? Systematic review might not be the right fit. Maybe you're like, you know what? I only have 3 months to do this. Okay, let's do a great literature review. We can help you develop a really good search. Maybe systematic review is not the way, or maybe your question is, a better fit for a scoping review. It is a long-term project that requires a lot of time and a team, so that's important. A protocol or a plan is required before you even begin working on the systematic review. There are several guidelines and standards, though, to help you conduct those systematic reviews, and then, of course, report what you did. As you saw, it is important to report what you did because they need to be reproducible. So here's our contact information. If you have any questions, we can consult and guide you in the right direction if you're still trying to figure out what's the best fit. If you do have a team and the time and a protocol, we can become, collaborators and help with your search strategy development, and just answer just any general questions about the systematic review process. So we'll pause there if you have any questions, and thank you so much for joining us.
This was amazing and very thorough. I really don't have any questions. And when I do set out to do something like this, I will definitely contact your team because this has been amazing. And what I've learned is it's not something that I should do alone or try to undertake this on my own. So I think that in the future is something I'm going to look back on and appreciate that was said and that was explained from the jump. So I really appreciate you all.
Oh, thank you so much. We appreciate you being here. Yeah, we're happy to help. So reach out anytime.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. You're welcome.